What is up, guys? Delboy here. So I wanted to weigh in on a debate that's been going on since Eubank Jr. versus James Degale, and that debate is about James Degale's future. Should he retire? Should he continue? Is he shot, or is there something left? If you saw my prediction video for the fight, I think you may kind of guess what way I'm leaning. I believe James Degale should retire. I think the guy is past his best and long past his best. James Degale has been showing signs of decline for quite some time, and against Eubank Jr. I felt he looked really disjointed, he looked slow, he looked clumsy, and he looked cumbersome. And James Degale has been looking like that for a few fights now in a row, and that gives me the impression that this guy is shot to bits. Sometimes fighters have one-off bad performances, but James Degale has had several in a row now, and the same flaws, the same problems show up fight after fight after fight after fight. And when people discuss a shot fighter, what makes a shot fighter? To me, there are several things you look out for. One of them being punch resistance. To me, James Degale's punch resistance has declined a lot over the past few fights. Eubank Jr. has never been a big one-punch knockout artist. Eubank Jr. has always been an accumulation puncher. But, the single shots that Eubank was catching Degale with, they were rocking Degale to his boots. He was hurt on numerous occasions by Eubank Jr. with single shots. And James Degale, back in the day, he always showed a good chin. He took big shots from the likes of George Groves, Porky Medina, Badu Jack. James Degale has always shown good durability. But in recent fights, that durability, has started to fade, and he gets hurt a lot more these days. And I think the fight that did it the most was the Badu Jack fight. But, there has been several fights throughout James Degale's career that would have contributed to him losing his punch resistance, because Degale has picked up a lot of punishment throughout his career. You can't just point at the Badu Jack fight. I look at his career as a whole. He's had a lot of tough fights, but the Badu Jack fight was the worst one. So, yeah, I believe James Degale's punch resistance isn't what it was. And another thing, when you look at shot fighters, another thing you look at is, general sort of physical attributes like hand speed, foot speed, punch output, things like that. They have all dropped. James Degale's stamina was never great in the first place, but in my opinion, in recent times, it's got even worse. Degale's speed and ability to put punches together isn't what it was. Go back and watch the Brandon Gonzalez fight. Go back and watch the Paraban fight. Go back and look at even the Andre Durrell fight. Look at Degale's hand speed in those fights compared to now. Look at how he put his shots together. Look at how he kind of jumped in and out of range. He was a lot quicker back then of both hand and foot. But these days, his speed has dropped rapidly. And not only has his speed dropped, his reaction times have dropped. He can't get out of the way of shots quickly anymore. He gets caught with silly shots. He can't pull the trigger, and that's the main sign of a shot fighter. James Degale's timing in recent fights has been truly awful. It's been awful. Even before the Eubank Jr. fight, look at the Truax fights, for example. Look at James Degale's timing in those fights. It was terrible, falling short with that left hand, missing the target against a fairly stationary guy, inaccuracy. Degale's timing in recent fights has been off. And, that's the telltale sign of a shot fighter, when you can't pull the trigger and, when you're timing, your sense of range is all gone. Degale doesn't have it anymore from what I can see. And I've been saying that for quite some time now. I said it in the build-up to this Eubank Jr. fight. And I was surprised with the amount of people who still felt James Degale had enough to beat Eubank Jr. I really was. I was surprised, to be quite honest. But yeah, from what I see, James Degale is not the fighter he was. I always felt James Degale was on the overrated side, I'll be honest. But it's clear he's not the same fighter. It's clear he's not the same guy. And he's lost a step in numerous different departments. Speed of both hand and foot, punch resistance, timing. Everything is not what it was, Yeah, I think James Degale's done, and I believe he should retire. Now, if he wants to continue, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. Listen, James Degale can make his own choices, as we all can in life, but I don't really want to see him in the ring again, I'll be honest. I can kind of hear differences in his speech from when he turned to pro. He's slurring a bit more now. You know, I think he's kind of had enough, to be quite honest. And it's up to people around him to kind of say, James, you know, it's probably time to retire. The question is, does he have the right people around him to advise him correctly? I'll give you an example. Let's say James Degale goes to his trainer, Jim McDonnell, and says, Jim, I want to continue fighting. What do you think Jim McDonnell says? Do you think Jim McDonnell will advise James Degale to retire? Or do you think Jim McDonnell will keep taking those paychecks despite knowing James Degale isn't the same fighter he once was? Because I can't see how Jim McDonnell cannot come to that conclusion. Everyone else can. It's obvious that James Degale isn't the same fighter. He's significantly past his best. And will Jim McDonnell actually say to him, do you know what? You can continue, but I'm not going to train you because I think you're done. You know, would he say that to James Degale? I'm not sure. Bear in mind, Jim McDonnell doesn't really have any other fighters of a high level. So it would be a big statement. If he were to say that to James Degale, then maybe it would sink in. But, you know, James Degale is a very headstrong individual. Some people say deluded. So, yeah, I just hope he's advised correctly. I don't really want to see him fight on anymore, because if he fights at a high level, at 168, he will get cleaned out. He will get knocked out. Callum Smith would do a serious job on James Degale. He would knock James Degale out. David Benavidez, who I believe is unproven, I believe he would do a big job on James Degale at this stage. James Degale is done. He's past it. There's no need for him to fight anymore. He's made money. You know, he's been a world champion. He's been an Olympic champion. I just hope he makes the right decision. But this is boxing, you know. The majority of times, boxing spits out the fighters and it continues. There's not many fighters out there who can say they retired at the correct time. You've got a few examples. Joe Calzaghe, he's a good example. Carl Froch, Lennox Lewis, you know, people like that, you know, they got out at the right time and they never came back. But, you know, those guys are few and far between. Usually people will stick around for way too long, or even just stick around for one fight too long. Look at Bernard Hopkins. You know, he took that Joe Smith Jr. fight and got badly hurt. It could have been a lot worse. You know, sticking around for that one more fight can be detrimental. So, yeah, I'm not going to say to James Degale he needs to retire. It's his choice, but I would like to see that happen, I'll be honest. Share your thoughts below. Peace.